have to stand right now.
Okay, so we'll get started. My name's Jesse Sims, and I'm the chair of Tech Talk. I think I know all of you guys. Hello again. Thank you for coming. And we're excited today to have Jaime Ball from the Arizona State Library to talk a little bit about technology and LSTA grants. I know for us in Buckeye, we've been really successful trying new technology projects using LSTA funds. So hopefully this will be informative, and you'll get not just ideas of other things people have done, but also sort of know the parameters and what things they consider when they're funding LSTA grants, especially for technology. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jaime.
Thank you, Jesse. Nice to see you. I see some familiar faces here. I'm going to have to go back and forth and hit this little button over here, so I hope that's not too annoying. There. So a little bit about me. Jaime Ball, I'm the Library Development Administrator for the Arizona State Library. And one of my major jobs there is to manage the federal funds that we get from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So I've done that for years, and I actually received a couple of LSTA grants when I was the Library Director in Bisbee and the Library Manager at Round Valley. So I know what it's like to sit where you are and try to figure out, like, how can I fund some ideas that I have. So overall, I've been around library land for quite a while, and I'm not going to give you a date or anything like that.
You were 12.
All right, I started when I was 12. So what we're going to do today is just go over really briefly what LSTA is all about, how it works in Arizona. I'm going to go over a short list of LSTA-funded projects that have a technology slant to them. We're going to talk about the elements of a successful LSTA grant application, kind of go over what your next steps might be, and then at the end, I hope that you will feel free to share any ideas you have for a project and ask any questions you might have. So LSTA stands for Library Services and Technology Act, and is actually now a title of the Museum and Library Services Act. It used to be a standalone act, but now it's a piece of the MLSA, which was just recently reauthorized in 2018 to include and emphasize digital inclusion, amongst other things. The Institute of Museum and Library Services is the agency that manages those federal funds. They distribute those funds across the country to all 50 states plus the territories, and the money is distributed to us on a population basis. So fortunately, Arizona has had an increase every year of funds because our population keeps growing. The way the funds shall be spent is based on the Act's priorities and purposes. IMLS basically comes up with what those priorities and purposes are. They get feedback from us, and then we, in order to get our funds, have to come up with a 5-year plan based on those purposes and priorities. That's basically how that flows, the money flows. So our 5-year plan currently runs from 2018 to 2022, and all grant proposals must reflect the goals that are outlined in the 5-year plan. And so what I'm going to do today is basically use our goals as a framework for discussing some of these technology-related projects. So that URL right there is the main one for LSTA. So here are our goals, and maybe the first thing you might notice is how broad they are. It's really hard for a library to think of something that doesn't fit into one of these categories. And that's on purpose, because things change. Okay, so now we're going to go into a short list. And there are just so many projects that could fit under the umbrella of technology. And I've not defined technology today. I'm just sort of going like, hey, it's kind of cool, it's digital, it's electronic, there's an emerging library service. So I'm not coming up with any fancy definition for it. If you want to see all of the projects that subgrants that have been awarded, I think 2015, go to that website as well. So we'll start with information access. And this is the overarching goal for information access grant category, that residents will have access to information in a variety of formats. And the picture here is from Buckeye Public Library, and it's the Library on the Go project. I can't remember exactly when that was, Jesse. I want to say 2017?
I think it was 17.
Yeah. And the goal of this project was to create a centralized digital library experience. And funds were used to purchase Communico. How is that working over there?
It's working good.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been able to sort of bring more and more modules online. There's a little pushback with some website calendar territory wars a little bit, but we've been able to find great ways to still leverage it to make it a much more seamless experience for people.
Yeah. So the idea was that all those modules, custom websites, and other registration tools, I think, would be included so that the user has that one-stop place to go. Another project that was recently funded is Higher Ed on the Spot, and that was funded to purchase hotspots to be lent to college students in the Auction Indian community. The library worked closely with the Department of Ed to target those students that didn't have internet at home. And this enabled them to do their homework and access materials required for the classes. So that's basically what that project was about. Like the partnership on that one. Another Buckeye Public Library project is going on right now. And this is the pop-up library, and I'm willing to bet you all know pretty much all about this one, and it's pretty new. So I'm not sure if you've gotten any results yet or findings yet from it. But
yeah, we've had some pretty good use in the first month. It's kind of tailed off, so we're looking at different ways to either move them or advertise them differently within the space to try to keep it kind of current.
Yeah. Do you think any of that tail off has to do with the content? Or?
I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is like people first hear about it and they're like, well, I want to try it. But then the people that are in that space consistently have all tried it.
Yeah.
If there's not new folks coming through all the time, you might not necessarily be getting that. So, yeah, we're still kind of looking at different routes.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that was really important about this project was, from our standpoint, was that our Reading Arizona project at the state library, they were able to merge some of our collection in with theirs, because we've had like really low usage. So we were like, let's piggyback on what Buckeye is doing in Phoenix Public, I think, as well.
Yep.
So here are a few other projects. They're new. I don't have any images for them, but I just wanted to point out that there's some variety here in terms of the size of libraries and what it is that they're using the funding for. So the Tech Check It Out was to purchase printers, scanner, laptops for people who are travelers coming through Sholo or summer visitors, so that they can basically have their home office. Then the STEAM with iPads, pretty typical actually in Douglas. They have already got some children's programming going on around STEAM. They needed some iPads, because what they've been doing was whoever the presenter was would use their personal phone to pull up the apps, and then the kids would all stand around. And, so it wasn't very effective. So they got it for that. Then they are piloting TV Whitespace in Douglas, and this is one of the wonderful things about LSTA. It doesn't always have to work perfectly the first time. Part of it is to pilot something new and innovative. So, she's running all kinds of interesting issues.
What is that project?
The TV Whitespace. It's setting up basically like a giant router that picks up frequencies that used to be taken over by TV and been freed up because of cable. And so what it does is create like a network, you know, but using that frequency.
And what's the range?
Heck if I know.
It's blocks.
Yeah, it's big.
Blocks, and
Yeah.
it's huge. We looked into that a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
We had to where to put the tower
Yeah.
physically.
And I heard that there's two different things. One is that like some rural areas where you have a lot of, there's nothing blocking the signal, so you've got this nice space to do it in. They don't have the infrastructure. You have to have
Right.
certain speeds, upload and download speeds, and they
Yeah.
don't have it. But then places that have the speeds, they don't have free channels, or they don't have free, there's too many buildings in the way blocking. And I don't know, it's really tough to find the right space according to Nicole and Mary. So. But they're trying it in Douglas, and we shall see. And then this last one that's listed here in Yavapai, they are deploying a library calendar, but they are doing it through the libraries and allowing community members to add their different events so that the library is not, obviously they're kind of controlling it, but they're inviting anyone to put in their events. So,
Jamie, do you have access to those examples on the website? Because I was curious about the Showa one. So.
yeah, so the snapshots, so if you go to the LSTA website,
Okay.
scroll down to the bottom, and the most recent snapshot will have these guys here.
Thank you.
And this is the description of what they're trying to do.
Cool.
Okay, so those are some examples of information access. In the informal education category, oh, and I want to point out that at the top of these slides and in the guidelines here, which they're online as well, you'll see the name of a library consultant. That's a person that you can contact with your idea that you might have and run it past them and say, you know, this is what I want to do. It's a good idea, and I'll get into that a little bit further along. To just check it out, make sure it's not off the map. I just had a phone call from someone yesterday who asked, do you have LSTA funding to pay for space needs assessment? And I hate to say no, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit in with our 5-year plan. It's too much like construction, and it's really good to just check in with your consultant. Anyway, so informal education, this is a really big category for particularly public libraries. Just expanding experience and knowledge for residents in your area. So the picture up there is called Creativity in a Box, and this was a project in Cochise County. And the one thing I wanted to point out about that was that this really worked well for the rural branches, because everything that was required for a person to do paper circuitry, audio storytelling, digital photography, digital movie making, some robotics with Spiro, is that
Spiro.
was all in a little box. It's just check it out. Here you go, and instructions and everything in there. Bot Builders in Yavapai County and Black Canyon City. It's a youth program. It's basically after school, tying in with the schools to strengthen kids' understanding and knowledge about robotics and coding. They've got a 3D printer and filament and a bunch of fun stuff. Closing the word gap, I put this in here as this was a very unusual and innovative use of funding for technology. So the idea here is there's this little device that's called it's from Lena Start, and it's this little recorder that is actually the child wears, and it picks up on conversation and reading with the parent, and then the software takes that audio and produces data. And you can't really make this out very well, but it shows you if there's been an increase in the number of recordings because of the using the device. And so the whole idea is basically to increase that home interaction around reading and literacy. So, did you know anything else about this, Danielle?
I don't.
Yeah, it was really intriguing. Some people in the review panel got the willies. You know, they're like, ew, ew, there's a device on the child. But, it's safe. It's not like a cell phone. It's not transmitting anything.
Well, in early literacy, they encourage parents to talk more to their child at home because it does gain a semblance of vocabulary. They, in some of the instruction that I received from the state library, if there's not a lot of communication or talking at home, the children don't progress as well in school. So they're trying to figure out, I'm guessing, how much is really happening at home and how to encourage more. So that's my guess, is that's really the word gap. Children are sort of measured by how much vocabulary they have, and they can determine whether or not there needs to be a little bit more action going on at home,
With the vocabulary.
which they can't always solve in school. But if you catch them early when they're younger, you can build the vocabulary. So that's probably what's happening, is trying to help the parents understand that they need to do some more talking, telling stories, reading out loud, or just having a mock conversation with your child is still a lot more than
Right.
being very little.
And I bet you there was some competition going on. There were 7 families that piloted this.
Yes.
I guess that helped too.
Yeah.
More engagement.
Right, and that's the key, is more engagement helps close that word gap. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okie dokie. So another example is this was actually a STEAM mini grant. So we have a number of mini grants, and last year was the $3,000 STEAM grant, was part of the informal education category, and so Tempe used their funds to work with their teams. They have a pretty strong team program there in Tempe, and you can see they explored all types of digital creativity stuff. So here are some more examples: coding clubs, the Maker Lab at Northern Arizona University. That was a pretty significant grant. They ended up with a wall of 3D printers, and anyone in the state can contact them and send the file and have their prototype printed out up there in Flagstaff. So that was cool. Touch and Learn digital literacy in Buckeye. The coders of tomorrow. We have seniors all the way. This is one of those from the cradle to the rocking chair type of categories. Says everyone can be involved in lifelong learning. So it's just examples of that. Inclusive communities is a pretty broad category as well, and inclusive is to try to get everyone in your community and have access to the same life literacies as anyone else, so that they can have access to tools to improve their health literacy, their financial literacy, parenting skills, you name it. So that's basically what inclusive communities is about. The picture there is from U2, and this was an assistive technology project in Prescott. They wanted to increase access for adults primarily with visual and or hearing impairments, and they used the funds to acquire assistive technology tools. And they have some in the library, but they also placed them with their partners in Prescott. So here's an example in Glendale. This is a workforce development type project focused really on small businesses, and they bought supplies and equipment for small businesses to come in. And one of the most successful aspects of this was for the business owners to learn how to do their own marketing, their own video and marketing tools. And they have all the equipment that someone could use for that. And leading technology in Yuma, another assistive technology. This was primarily It ended up being primarily for children who were developmentally disabled or perhaps on the autism spectrum. And so they bought some really cool tools to engage children with learning and with the world. So more examples in this category. The Technology Ambassador, that's an example of one. We saw it also in Clifton, where they used LSTA funds to hire someone to come in and do one-on-one digital literacy training to help someone get their email, to do job searches. And that is really popular. The problem is trying to sustain it. And in Tuba City, the county saw the need and saw that this was being addressed. They actually picked up that person's salary, so that was a good one. Mach 1 Innovation, I think that's somewhere in this building, right?
It's right next door.
I've seen pictures. I haven't actually been in there since the flood, but the funds were used to help renovate after the rains came in here. So the Oculus Rift in Maricopa was basically a demo type situation where they bought a few Oculus Rift headsets and just let people explore and to see what it was like. That's something that hasn't really taken off with our LSTA program as much as I'm a little surprised we're not seeing more VR, AR applications. But I wanted to also point out there the coding, creating careers. You saw some coding projects over in informal education. Now you have some coding projects over here in inclusive communities. It's all about emphasis. There's no strict rules about, well, I have a coding project, it must be an informal education. No, not necessarily. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. And job development was what was key at Wilcox. Let's see here. Make sure I said what I want to say. Okay. And then final, fourth category is institutional improvements. And there aren't any general applications allowed in this category. We set the mini grants for it. And so there are going to be 2 this year. The Wi-Fi hotspots will continue. And then we're adding a staff development day as well. But just to focus on the Wi-Fi hotspots right now, who's circulating hotspots? Okay, Peoria. So there are quite a few libraries now that are doing it. Bisbee's doing it. Some of the tribal libraries are starting to do it. And so policies have been set. It's starting to really get some traction. So it's something you want to experiment with. This might be a way to start. And you can see why. I mean, you get 4K, that will cover some devices and some subscriptions. It varies. If you only have Verizon, for instance, it's expensive. The subscription is expensive. And so you get fewer devices. If you have T-Mobile, my understanding is that's a less expensive subscription, so you can get a few more devices. But the things that people have done with it is pretty impressive. So I mentioned the new mini grant. There are 2 that are carrying over. The Collections and Programming Grant, which is a mini grant in the Information Access category. And those are really, there's $4,000, and they're really broad. Any kind of collection that you would like to enhance or to establish for underserved populations, and then a program that goes with it. And then, as I mentioned, the Wi-Fi hotspots is continuing this year, and here are the new ones. So the citizen science kits are going to be under informal education, Law for AZ, which is an access to justice mini grant in the inclusive communities category, and staff development day is a new one for institutional improvements. All these good things are in the guidelines. So, I just want to point out, because we're in Tech Talk, that the Citizen Science mini grant is basically going to give you the funding to purchase already created kits. But you can certainly bring in your experts to come in and explore whatever category you're looking at. This is the night sky one. They have all kinds of kits for weather and climate and bugs and who knows what all. So there's a link here. I can send this to you, Jesse, this PowerPoint, but it's in the guidelines on our LSTA webpage. That's the place to start. You can learn more about it. All right, so were there any questions about that? About just sort of laying out some of those projects? Because at the end, we can really get into some ideas and questions you might have. But just for now, are there any questions about that? Categories? Okay. So what makes a successful LSTA grant application? Well, this is just part of it, but I think these are key components of it. So there needs to be some identifiable community need behind it. Innovation is prized, but it's not required. So, and innovation might be innovative in your library, even though it's been done in Chicago or something for 10 years. Partnerships are looked upon fondly. If the project could serve as a model for other libraries, that's a plus. It has to address the goals that we're covering right now, and it needs to follow the guidelines and requirements. That sounds like a no-brainer, but sometimes it's amazing. So on the community needs piece of it, the important thing here is it's easy sometimes to think about what our library needs and not what the community needs. So there is sometimes a fine line. I've heard projects proposed that say, we've had a lot, we get buried with questions about, blah, 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 blah. I'd love to have some LSTA funded to hire someone else to answer those questions. That would be great. But, is that really what the community needs? I mean, maybe it is. Maybe meeting those needs also helps the library. That's great. But it's the way you present it in your application that's really important to establish that here's a need and here's how we know there is one. One of the things we see is some research that's been done to talk about the needs in a general way, and that's fine. So if you do some statistical research and say, in our community, 45% of the population does not have home internet. That's awesome. The more targeted you can be to your community, the better. So you could talk about Arizona as a whole. 30% don't have home internet. But if you could get it down to your community, that's the best. So partnerships, the important thing here is that you have some common goal. That it's not let me just grab a hold of Dairy Queen over here and let's do something together. That could work actually, but the idea is that your partner has the same goal that you do, and you all have skin in the game. IMLS likes partners. State Library likes to see partners. It's not required. There are some projects, that I think when we're talking about the Buckeye project with Communico, it's just not necessary. Or Yavapai County's bulletin board, it's not necessary to have a partner to establish the grant. But if you see the opportunity, it elevates the library. It makes your project much easier to promote and sustain. So if you see an opportunity, that's a good thing to go for. So what do the reviewers look for? They look to be able to understand what you're asking for. So trying to be really super clear about what your need is and why you want this money and what you plan to do with it. How does it fit in with the LSTA purposes and our Arizona goals? And again, what did you do to figure out that there was a need in your community? Some of this has to do with capacity and clearly thinking through, if I do this project, what all will I require? Is there enough staff? Do they have enough time? Do I need to actually ask for a contractor perhaps to make this happen? What kind of difference do you hope to make with this project? And then, again, sort of a capacity question there. There are risk assessment questions in the application, so just make you aware that these are not heavily weighted. They are just questions that we are required to ask and that we take into consideration. So if the project manager has never managed an LSTA grant before, it's just something that we consider when looking at perhaps having to cut funding somewhere. If they're asking for $500,000 to do something, we may say, well, they've never managed one of these before, so maybe we go back and cut some of that. Reorgs, years of employment, and making sure that the accounting is able to separate the different funds. And the neat thing about that last question that we finally started asking is that it makes the project manager aware that they need to talk to accounting and procurement if you can. Okay, so what do you do? Let's say you have an idea. What actually are the steps that you would take? So the very, 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 very first step is to go online and read this thing. This is like the little Bible on what you need to do to apply for LSTA. You want to determine the best grant category, and there's likely to be overlap. So, feel free to call me or one of the other consultants if you're not sure which category to select. And maybe a mini grant might be the thing to do if you're just starting out with LSTA. And I keep emphasizing this. It's just really, even though we can't guarantee whether or not you would get any funding, obviously, in the review sessions, if a consultant is familiar with your project, you're not able to be there. That consultant can explain or maybe just, help with some of those pitfalls. This is a very truncated version of the usual grant training that I do, and they are scheduled in January 2020. And you just need to go to library development calendar, and you can see the dates. I believe January 9th is the 3-hour workshop in Phoenix, and the webinar is the 14th and the 16th, and they're 1-hour webinars. It goes into a lot more detail than I'm going into right now about what are allowable costs and how do you deal with the budget in the application, just how to complete it. And in fact, if you go to the workshop, you're able to actually start working on the application and get very, pretty far down the path of actually completing one. And it's nice to be able to, throw out your ideas at the workshop and get some feedback, see what other people are doing. So I recommend it if you are new to it. If you've been, Kathleen, Jesse, I would love for you to come, but you're not going to hear much new. Okay, that's just the truth. So you want to check your eligibility in the grant guidelines, and I would imagine everyone sitting in here is going to be A-okay. Sometimes we run into issues with special libraries, not actually having qualified staff, or they don't, if they charge for their services, but I think everyone in here probably has no problem. So inside the guidelines, there is a worksheet that you can use to answer all the questions first, which is what I recommend. The software that we use, the grants management software, just has ticks, you know? So I had many a phone call, it's shut down on me and didn't save. Just using the worksheet, you can lay everything out. If you have any questions, you can call a consultant. Then you can copy and paste it into the online software, and it just goes a little more smoothly, I would think. But it mirrors the online application. So a few more tips. Talk with your boss about your project idea. One of the sad things that I have seen happen occasionally is that administration starts going off in a different direction. They don't always tell us what's happening. And so you have this great idea that fits with what you think is going on and is key for the library, and administration has moved off in another direction, is no longer something they want to support, and so you've wasted your time. So get that all cleared up right away before you even get too far into this process. I can't say enough, obviously, contact one of us. It just saves, angst. And please, consider that sometimes the software blows up or whatever, just plan for those delays, because one thing that we are strict about is the submission deadline. If it is after the submission deadline, it's just not even looked at. So that's it. We have reviewers who are not librarians, so try to spell things out for them and avoid acronyms. And if you can, get someone to review your application and proofread it before submitting is just a good idea, to be sure that all the elements are connecting. So after you apply, I check to be sure that it's complete and that it's met the postmark. And then we have a two-step review process. We have, like 9 to 12 reviewers, who some of them in the state library, some of them outside. I think Danielle, you were a reviewer.
No, that's true.
Yeah, cool. And then after that group reviews everything, then library development meets with the state librarian, and we narrow it down. One of the cool things is in Arizona is that we want everyone to get funded. That's what we want. If the project is viable, we want to give you money. So we follow up with questions prior to the award. If something is not clear, the reviewers want to know more, we don't have any qualms about calling you or emailing you to try to get more info. So it's not the end of the world when your application is submitted, maybe there's a piece missing. We do want you to succeed. And then the actual awards notifications are sent out, I believe it's May 1st. Yep, May 1st. And the grant funds will become available the following week, which is when the grant recipients workshop will be. And I'm planning to do a recipient webinar as well, record something, particularly for those who are doing mini grants, because it's not quite as complicated. So these dates are also in the guidelines. All right. I'm hoping that you guys have some ideas. And this is a empathy VR equipment, so that you can put all this gear on and have some sense of what it's like to be my age. 29. But as I said earlier, I'm really interested that in Arizona we haven't gotten hardly any applications for VR, AR.
Yeah.
And some other states are doing workforce development around that, empathy, VR. So, okay, so ideas. Has anybody been thinking in the back of their head, technology or not? Boy, if I had some more money, what would I do? You guys
Do I have to be the one doing it, or can I get a contractor to do it? I mean,
You can get a contractor to do
that
it.
makes a difference in how.
Totally. In
much
fact,
I can go for.
Right. And in
Because-
fact, that's one of the things reviewers look for is, do they think they're gonna do all this, or they don't see a contractor in here? Yeah.
Right, because staff time is actually the least resource we have.
Yeah. Now, sometimes a library will phase a project, so they'll have a planning phase. They'll hire someone to look out and assess something or figure out what they need. And then they apply for phase 2. The only issues there is there's no guarantees that there'll be money for phase 2. Well, that's the main problem, is that you just don't know if you can get it funded. But that is an approach.
We're hoping to reduce our fixed footprint of our computer lab to something a little bit more mobile, check-outable laptops and things like that. However, there's some other things that need to be done so that would be more successful, like maybe a couple of Wi-Fi boosters or mobile printing. So in a package to do B, I would also want to include A, so that I at least have the building blocks to have this launch. Can I do both in one grant?
So you're talking about like maybe having more access points on
Yes.
one hand, and then the actual devices also?
Yeah.
Yes, you could put them together.
Okay.
And the reason I'm hesitating is we have moved away from certain types of infrastructure equipment. So for instance, the large document scanners, we're just moving away from it because it's really tough to pay for that. Our money just doesn't go that far. But mobile, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and access points, yes, if someone else is putting them in.
Yeah, we would have our city or city come out and do that.
Yeah, so.
But it's really trying to build on boosting access and accessibility
Right.
to the printing so that we could really offer the mobile laptops throughout the building and people can just do it. My worry is we won't be built in enough security and those things will walk out. But I'd also want some software that just basically kills that baby, if they go 5 feet past the front door kind of thing. So all that would have to be, all that would have to be incorporated into the grant.
Yes.
At least to start,
Right.
I'm happy to try it as a pilot, but we are in the midst of trying to revamp our main library. We want to offer a little bit more flexibility, even though building is not flexible, the insides can be. So that's where I'm kind of going. So I have to create an A plus B equals C kind of situation. Okay.
But no, it all sounds like it all has to go together.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
so-
absolutely does.
Yeah, so,
Because we know our weaknesses,
yeah,
but the weaknesses have to be supported before we can even offer this even. Okay.
Considering something like software licensing, something I'm thinking like Microsoft Office, something we would have to license through our IT, can part of that grant money be paid toward IT towards those licenses?
you can use the money to buy the licenses. And the only issue is that it can't extend past the grant cycle, September 30th of whatever it was, 2021.
Right.
Then you have to, some other funding, you have to pick it up.
Okay.
Okay.
I had another tip that I didn't see up there that we've had pretty much for every technology LSTA thing, which is you have to talk to your IT department,
Yes.
whoever's administering that. And even if, you can have a conversation, explain what it is, they may come back once you get the money and say, oh, well, actually, we want to do it this way. And you can get sort of hemmed in with that, but it's good to keep that in mind when you're going for something. If it's a project and like 90% of it is something IT is going to have control over, maybe that's not the best route to do it because you might end up kind of stuck holding the bag and they're over there doing what they want to do with the project. So that's one thing. And then kind of one of the ideas we were looking at was doing metadata for our Buckeye Valley News archive that has been digitized already, but we don't have the metadata for it to then host it on Arizona Memory Project.
Right.
So kind of going to the partnership thing and trying to find a community need. We had it hosted online. The company that was hosting it went out of business. It hasn't been hosted online, so all our old timers and folks in Buckeye are asking about it.
And there's the need right there.
Right. And so just trying to find like, okay, where's that thing that's where everything sort of locks into place. That's generally where we've had the most success, is trying to find something that fits multiple criteria in that way.
And you brought two things to mind when you mentioned the IT tip and procurement.
Yeah.
Don't you have to talk to them?
Yeah.
Whoa, I've seen people really just, the whole project just
Yeah.
collapse because of
They're
that.
like, we can't do it that way. We have to go to bid, and we have to do this, and we have to do that. Yeah.
Next thing you know, the project's over, the timeline's over.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is the, when you were talking, what was the thing you were just saying about,
Partnerships.
Community.
community needs and aspirations is
Right.
another thing. So we talk about needs. Sometimes the community has an aspiration, something that they want to achieve, that will work as well. So I just wanted to bring that in.
Yeah. Just to kind of build on what you said, Jesse, we created a couple of worksheets that that different departments have to sign off on. One was how impactful will it be on IT, but also how impactful is it going to be on your tech services department? Because
Yeah.
if we get a grant to build a new collection, it's gonna hit the tech services department somewhere. So we have to make sure that they're aware, and even though there's a flow in tech services, they need to be aware that this grant is going to create more work for them, and that they shouldn't be surprised, because surprising your colleagues is not. And so we built these worksheets to make sure that we're talking to the right people in our own building for communication, so that they're aware that this stuff is happening. I mean, we also had a project where a staff member who won the grant then went on to another job and left no information. So we kind of picked up the grant and ran with it, but it was still hard to do. I mean, there were a lot of moving parts that I think I'm not sure if we got them all, because the major grant writer took off. Findable, but still, it was now our baby, and
It's a great opportunity, we wish her well.
I'm glad where she went, but the thing is that you gotta talk to your folks. If you're doing this grant in a silo and other people are affected, they're gonna be mad at you. So we built these worksheets to sign off on, so people are aware. And it was literally IT and internal, to make sure that, there's no surprises, everybody's on board, blah, 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 blah. So, just, for self-protection.
Sustainability is such a huge thing when it comes to
Yeah.
technology too.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the questions on there I made them put on, is like, okay, once the grant is over, what do you need to support this equipment? Are you gonna continue to pay for software licensing, voting machines? What are you gonna do when the money's gone? Is there other funding that can continue the program? Especially with the iPads, the iPads are a great idea, the different ways they've been deployed, but they've been end of life.
Yeah, 2 years.
Yeah. And that's the thing, get the crap beat out of them by, the kids that are using them or whatnot. And so, okay, now in my office, I got hitting up like 9, 10 iPads that are so out of date, I can't even get the apps updated at this point. It's-
9 or 10 doorstops.
Yeah, they are.
Paperweights, yeah.
I have a question. What's an example or maybe a category of a technology-related grant that generally you don't fund? I know you mentioned the document station. What are some other ones like that? So if you're thinking like, oh, I want a new self-check, or I want this, or Gates, or maybe like, oh,
RFID.
Right.
Nope. So you want to know things that
Yeah, like what's
not-
that category, I guess, or what's the general thing about those projects that make them not necessarily part of it?
In the guidelines. There is a section.
Don't you know it's my heart yet?
I should.
Not you, him.
On page 5, project grants versus general operating grants. So that's sort of the bucket there. So LSTA grants are competitive project grants. A project is defined as a temporary endeavor with a beginning and end that creates a unique product, service, or result. Projects are differentiated from operations, which are the ongoing activities that comprise the day-to-day operations of a library. LSTA grants should fund project costs, not general operational costs. So examples are major infrastructure upgrades, such as RFID technology, document and charging self-service stations, replacement desktops and laptops, and we move around with money so fast, trying to replace everyone's computers. Vehicles and trailers. Furnishings that are not associated with a specific project. Again, same reason. It's like you can walk out here on the floor below and go like, yep, some of these chairs might need some replacement. Well, we can't afford to do that with LSTA. But if it's part of a specific project, like a space, so you're creating a youth center, and you need those, those banquet tables or whatever those are called, because that's what the kids, your teen advisory council say they want. That fits. And computers and other electronic devices that aren't associated with a specific project. So.
Question for you. Would something like a height adjustable table, a computer desk to serve for disabled folks in wheelchairs, would that fall, what kind of category would that fall in if it was for like community access?
Yeah, it was in the public space, not, it was bought for the public.
The issue there is that it's not a whole project. So in other words, it's a good thing to have the ADA, and inclusive. But if there's no project associated with that. So for instance, when Prescott did their U2, one of the things they asked for was a desk that would allow someone in a wheelchair to roll up to it to see the new computer that was loaded with JAWS and some other assistive technology. So along with these iPads and these hearing things and
So it's
it
part
was
of
this
the
whole
package.
and all these partners involved and this big expo, and it was a project. And so that was just one piece. A lot of it is framing.
It's like an accessibility area, which would probably
Right.
computer with software on there and whatever else you could like to
Yeah.
address the needs of our citizens.
Yes.
That could
And-
be
and-
possibly rolled up into
Right. And then if you have a partner that is an expert
yes.
in that area that help you define what those materials would be, supplies and equipment. Yeah,
Cool.
Cool, okay.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the average, success rate for applications for the grants?
Last
50-50
year-
or?
Last year was I think we declined 2 out of 65.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
90 something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Now we have had every year is different.
Mhm.
So we have had years. I want to say it was 2017 or 2016 was one of those years where it was more like 50%. We had requests totaling 1.6 million, and our budget was 800,000. So the amount was 50%. I think the number was still pretty high though, a number of actual applications, because we go back and we say we're short on cash. Can you modify your project to not include this or this? And a lot of times people are like, sure, we can do that, because that means we still get 1/3 of what we asked for.
Mhm.
But, last year we declined only 2.
And is that about average, 800,000?
Yes. Any other ideas or questions?
There was mention of a staff development.
Day.
What was that?
So that's a new mini grant, and
Okay.
it's in the institutional improvements category, and it's $3,000 to bring in a national figure, buy materials to support your staff, and it's for, the way it's designed is for that one day when you have your in-service, and you can, have a really impactful one, if you have some money. And
That's really cool.
yeah.
So it can be for people who already have a staff day established, just it would give you some money to make it even that more impactful.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it could be a speaker, I mean, that's like a speaker's fee.
Oh yeah.
Almost.
That's a cheap speaker.
Yeah. Negotiated.
It's a negotiated speaker. I think Pima County did this, and they were able to get a couple of speakers based on their topics. Right. A couple of speakers and some books. That workbooks for the for the staff. And they have a pretty big staff. So. Okay. Well, if there isn't anything else right now, please get a hold of me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.